This is the judge in Milwaukee who just got convicted of a felony. She obstructed law enforcement when she was presiding over her courtroom in Milwaukee. Here she is in handcuffs. This is the guy that she helped evade arrest. His name was Eduardo Flores Ruiz, and he was in the courtroom because of strangulation, suffocation, battery, and domestic abuse. He had been deported before. And before we get into the details of how this judge got eventually convicted of this crime, I want to take a little bit of a different angle on this story. So Hannah Dugan, actually, before she was a judge, was the executive director of Catholic Charities. And I ran into Catholic Charities when I lived in Chicago. I found that there are some good people involved in Catholic Charities and that it is extremely progressive. Even though, ironically, a lot of the Catholics I know are not extremely progressive. So we're going to get back to this theme of kind of institutional capture. Anyway, here's Hannah Dugan being interviewed in 2016. She said she wants to use the law to advance social change. She likes that judges serve as independent public officials, really? Because we're going to get back into this thing of like, who is really being anti-democratic in situations like this? So a lot of this case comes down to what an administrative warrant is. Because an administrative warrant is different than a judicial warrant signed by a judge. This, in the case of ICE, is signed by an immigration official. So it doesn't have as much force as a judicial warrant. The main thing is that these administrative warrants allow for arrests in public spaces, but they don't allow ICE, for example, to enter a home that's considered a private space. And in researching this post, my experience was honestly one of seeing such an intense desire to reframe and to change a relatively simple case. For example, finding out the facts. Surveillance video from the public hallway caught Flores Ruiz, so this is the defendant, and his attorney arriving on Good Friday. That's not how you would usually report this case. It's the date that they arrived. And they said that the officers, referring to the ICE officers, wore hoodies and baseball caps. I mean, yeah, this guy, he just looks like a normal plain-clothed cop. But the media is reporting it as wearing hoodies and baseball caps. The reason that they do this is because they don't want to draw attention to themselves, because they want to be able to facilitate the arrest without any extra drama. So the way this went down is former Judge Dugan's clerk, Alan Freed, it's this guy here. He comes into Hannah Dugan's courtroom and says that there are fascists in the hallway. He said he was upset and a little bit outraged. So then Hannah Dugan, this lady, who was in handcuffs recently, gets this other judge from her courtroom involved, Cristela Cervera. Hannah Dugan tells her, ICE is here. We need to go check that they have a warrant. So Cervera starts to unzip her robe, because usually you do not wear your robe outside the courtroom, and Dugan tells her to keep it on. Cervera says, hey, this conveys a sense of ceremony. Usually we keep this in the courtroom, but she keeps on her robe. So Dugan goes out into the hallway and confronts these ICE agents. There's 6 of them. The other judge, Cervera, said that Dugan's irritation progressed into anger. And she tells the ICE agents, it needs to be a judicial warrant, needs to be a judicial warrant, needs to be a judicial warrant. And interestingly, in the moment, Cervera basically validates Dugan and says, I think she's right about that. She's not, because in the actual case against Dugan, her defense team did not dispute the fact that an administrative warrant was sufficient to bring the man into custody. So anyway, what Dugan does is she sends the ICE agents to the Chief Judge Carl Ashley's office. And she actually pawns this off on her other judge, Cervera, who she had go and escort the agents to the office. Which actually Cervera didn't like, because that meant that she couldn't preside over her cases for a little while. So anyway, Cervera finally gets to go back to her courtroom, and then somebody in the courtroom says, you're goated now, because she realizes eventually that she had just helped defendants evade an arrest. Because while she was escorting these ICE agents to the Chief Justice's room, which was apparently kind of hard to find, Dugan goes back to her courtroom and tells the defendant, this illegal immigrant, Flores Ruiz, to come with her. And she leads him and his attorney out a back jury door, which defendants never go in, into a public corridor outside the courtroom. So she basically sneaks this guy outside a side door of the courtroom. Here's Dugan and Cervera in the hallway, starting to interact with the ICE agents. And I would just point out, media saying hoodies and baseball caps. Do these guys look dressed in some funny way for a Wisconsin winter? And then here's the side door. So this is where basically Hannah Dugan points this defendant to go out the courtroom. But what happens is one of the ICE agents sees what's going on and basically walks past Dugan and starts to follow the defendant and eventually captures him in the street because he was able to escape. So the former Judge Dugan had told the defendant, go down the stairs, basically instructing him on how to get out of the courtroom. She says, I'll do it. I'll take the heat. So she knows that she's doing something incorrect and probably is going to get into trouble. And if Flores Ruiz had taken the stairs instead of going into the hallway, then basically it looks like the ICE agents would have had an even harder time getting him. So, is this what this lady means by advancing social change? She's reading to me like a person who is extremely aggressive, looping in this other judge into her scheme, sending a defendant who is there defending himself against battery charges and assault charges into a side door and instructing him on how to get out of the courtroom. And importantly, a jury found her guilty. So this wasn't like a judge that found her guilty. A jury of American citizens found her guilty. And I told you that my angle on this is going to be a little different. To me, honestly, the case is open and shut. But what I found in my research is just how aggressive our American institutions have gotten about defending illegal immigrants. Even when I was just looking up what a judicial warrant was, you just see these things like Project South. It was hard for me to find information. They say ICE administrative document. This is patently false. An administrative warrant is something that exists. It's not an administrative document, whether or not you want to believe that. Pages of these immigration lawyers, Immigrant Legal Resource Center, pages, bulletins about federal agents in North Carolina, the New York City Bar, the Association of Attorneys condemns the arrest of Hannah Dugan. A California state senator says, this shows that democracy is under attack. So let's just talk about that. Currently, who is attacking democracy? Because the Immigrant Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996, passed by the Congress and signed into law by Bill Clinton, this is the law of the land, passed by a Congress elected by people. Here is the result of a Democratic presidential election. The Electoral College clearly won by this guy. The popular vote even clearly won by this guy. But something has happened where people like this, ironically, think that their role as a judge is to advance social change rather than uphold the rule of law. So yeah, man, democracy is under attack in America, just not from who you think it is.